everyone. Welcome to AI Would Agree. For this episode, I've got a very special and unlikely connection. As you can tell from, yeah, I struggle. I struggled with the name for this one. I'm not going to lie. I always like to come up with something a little bit snappy, a little bit different. But I enjoy this one. Today's guest is Richard Beaven. Welcome to the show, Richard.
Hi, Paul. Thank you for inviting me.
Good to have you along. Good to have you along. Um, it's an interesting conversation as to how we actually met, because I think originally I was kind of reaching out to you in your previous role, which we'll touch on in a moment. Um, and then I realized that after some time of us being connected, that you'd actually left that business and we're now more working in consulting and freelance approach, which kind of, it's always nice when that happens to an extent, because that opens a lot of doors to people that would otherwise be worried that I'm trying to pitch them. And I am genuinely quite interested in networking with a lot of interesting people. From there, I think you got involved in a couple of our outbound webinars that we were running with Gary Gormley, Marianne Withers, and Jimmy. And I loved your viewpoints on that show. For me, it was kind of refreshing to have somebody who had that senior background that you've got, willing to kind of put their own opinions forward and force conversation on certain topics. So it's great to have met you, Richard, and I'm really pleased to have you on the show. Um, for the guests who are kind of watching the show from home, would you like to do just kind of a quick 5-minute whistle stop tour of how you got into, I guess, the insurance brokering business and where you're at the moment?
Yes, I'd love to. Half a career in banking and half a career in insurance. And it's just tipped into 40 plus years. So quite a long time now. So I'm now a very old man. Um, well, how did I get into insurance? My last sort of pre-insurance role was at Reuters, and I had a telephone call from Andy Briggs, who was running the Lloyds Bank's general insurance business, and said, yeah, we've got an opportunity for a COO role. And I said, well, not being in insurance. And he said, don't worry, we're looking for people that are interesting and outside the industry to come in and blend with great people from the inside. I really liked him and I really liked the job, went for it. Slightly struggled to get through the FCA, as you can imagine, that they were like, who's this chap? And there's nothing about insurance. They grilled me for a good hour on claims. I was pathetic, I have to say. And then I ended up saying, by the way, my head of claims to be is renowned for being absolutely outstanding. So I think she knows everything that I don't. So hopefully that's okay, and managed to scrape through. So I did a few happy years there. Ended up doing also Scottish Widows operations, and then went into a company called Swinton, which was one of the largest analog broking businesses in the UK, with 450 branches, and I led the digital transformation of that business. We ended up, closing the branches, slimming it down, opening new call centers, doing all sorts of things over a course of 2.5 years. So it was a pretty speedy, but we took a business that was in slow decline and turned it around. And then ultimately, the business was sold by its French parent. And then after a bit swanning around the world, I joined a company called Brightside, another insurance broking business, this time backed by private equity. We had a bit of a turnaround to do there, get it back on a growth trajectory, which we did, and sold that business, last year. And then again, after swanning around for quite a lot last year, I did quite a lot of lockdown holidays, I have to say. So sorry if I'm pissing everybody off. It was quite a lot of fun. And then it was back and I set up my little consultancy business. Really, people ask me from time to time, to help out on a number of things. So that's what the consultancy business does. And a complete range of things, from tech startups to, mostly insurance, but, an interesting health startup, for example, I've been working on. But the key thing is, I really want to get back into the industry. So working with former colleagues to see if we can find a way of doing that. So I'm pretty buried in trying to land that one as we speak. So, that's the little potted history of my insurance so far.
Sounds exciting. Fantastic. I'm sure with some amazing experiences and some fascinating connections as you've gone through that journey, Richard. Um, Before we move on to anything else, I have to ask, why did you call your own consultancy the Unlike Group? What's the story?
So, a great friend of mine runs an amazing business that is a marketing agency and consultancy, and they work with huge brands across the world like eBay. And I can't really afford him, but he's my best mate. And he said, well, I'll come up with some ideas for your company name. And he said, the thing about you, Richard, is that you're not conventional in any way. So, the first openly gay COO in insurance business, there's lots of things. I was a trustee of Stonewall, and he said, your view on many things is slightly unconventional. So a bit unlike everyone else. So he said, I think you should call your business unlike, so you're unlike everyone else, or you do things unlike. So that's really where it came from. A bit of fun.
And I think, I think that probably resonates with why we've probably enjoyed our conversations together that we've had offline, is that, that's kind of where we see ourselves as modular analytics company as being very different to anybody else that's out there in the market. When you've got a CEO that actively calls out against AI automation of agents, despite being in an AI, machine learning and data science business at its heart, you kind of attract a lot of attention, sometimes for the right reasons, most of the time for the right reasons, but sometimes not.
Yeah.
And yeah, I remember that kind of vivid conversation between you and Jimmy disagreeing on the webinar, which, it's good. I like, we're never afraid of that sort of conversation. It's good to have conversation and different opinions from people. I don't think there's anything worse than operating in a sandbox where everybody just agrees with everybody else.
I agree with that. So I think you do end up with this kind of group think or sort of, consultant led speak. Everybody's doing this, so let's all do it because we all think it's the right thing to do. No one's actually stopped and said, is it? We do get that an awful lot. And then you get this kind of mantra of, like AI is good. Well, is it? It has good part, but it's not always good. And I think that, or everybody rushing towards it thinking, if I don't talk about this, then, I'm considered a dinosaur, but actually better have a good conversation about it and not do it than or invest in it. And at least you've gone through the thought process. So I'm with you on conversation, and particularly some of the work I do in diversity and inclusion. You can imagine it's a lot of getting people to talk, because I think the way we break down a lot of the barriers in that space is talking. It's usually for fear of saying the wrong thing that people stay stunned in meetings and don't know what to say. Whereas if you can get people to talk, usually, that whilst they might ask a clumsy question, there's no such thing as a wrong question. It doesn't matter how it's asked, as long as people understand, you get a conversation going. I'm a great believer in that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think as long as the intentions are good in the questions it's asked, a little bit of clumsiness can be forgiven. But I completely, I can see where you're coming from with that. And I guess at times I've been that person in the past who's wanted to stay quiet. Unfortunately, it's not in my nature to stay quiet. So
I've never recall. That's
apologies to the people that I've spoken with who I've asked those clumsy questions to. But it's not in my nature to not say things. But I think leading on from that, though, Richard, I've heard you say in the past, business of the future will be part of an ecosystem. And I guess that kind of leads into that quite nicely in terms of having different businesses operate together at what they're best at. But do you want to expand a little bit on what I meant by?
Yeah, I think this for me is a really important fundamental about how the world of business is changing. I think in the past, we considered ourselves sort of macho and manly, if I can use those horrible expressions, when we did everything. Yeah, we had everything, we built everything, we had our own technology, we had this, and it was all homespun in-house, and that was all considered to be kind of great. What that's led to, particularly in insurance, of course, is a huge spider of infrastructure that is very difficult to change because it was invented 40 years ago by Eric, who's now left. And we don't know where the code was written and all those sorts of things. And I think what that has meant is that a real slowness to change, partly driven by some of that legacy tech debt, but partly driven by the fact that, we're so busy looking at running the machine, you stopped looking outwards about what's out there that's really capable, that now is quite affordable, that you wouldn't have done in the past. And like, one of my favorite examples is speech and voice analytics, which, from our conversation, I'm a huge fan of, particularly for insurance, because we're a regulated business. We need to make sure we're doing the right thing for customers, particularly vulnerable customers. And it's almost impossible for team leaders and managers to be listening all the time to make sure that's right. Whereas with tools like voice and analytics, the machine can do it for you. So A, it means you don't need an army of people doing random sampling. And B, in the past, that technology was humongously expensive, and therefore only incredibly well-endowed businesses could even think about doing it if they even thought about it. Whereas now, you can partner with great businesses, get an affordable, like your full, that you can get an affordable solution for any size of business that can do what the big guys and girls used to do. And I think there's loads of examples of that now, where you can bolt things together. You've got better connectivity. You've got more use of open APIs so that you can link your data together more easily, and then just go and get what's the best out there. Coupled with, don't then try and bastardize it. Because the other thing is, yeah, but we've got all these smart people in technology. We kind of like your tool, but actually we're going to tweak it. We're going to make it pink for us, or whatever it may be. And then that's where the trouble starts to happen. So my view is, you want an ecosystem of great partners who deliver the thing that you need, no more, no less. You don't play around with it, and you get 80% of the benefits that you were looking for, quickly and fast, in a partnership. I mean, I remember years ago in when I was in Lloyd's Banking Group, the idea that we would have, software as a service and stuff in the cloud and all that sort of stuff was anathema. It really was. And of course, that wasn't that many years ago. And now, there isn't a business out there that isn't thinking about, probably isn't using Amazon Web Services or whatever it may be, and have lots and lots of software as a service. No one knows, where the actual, data center is, which country the data's in. You need to do all that well, but it doesn't matter anymore, because that's not what you're worried about. Having to worry about running data centers and security and all that sort of stuff. Horrendous. Give it to someone in. That's not your core business. Give it to someone else.
Yeah. I think if I'm going to offer a limited amount of advice on the back of that to businesses that are considering technology, my advice would be to consider how much of your potential solutions that you want to bring into the business can be done with the same partner. So it's great having an ecosystem of businesses that are out there, but obviously the more that you can bring under one roof or under one platform, the better it is for the business.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we kind of really stand out in our marketplace, and we do a lot of work around insurance and banking, is not just providing the insights in the first place, but helping you get to the outcomes. So, the conversation analytics is great. You find out lots of fascinating things that you'd never be able to find out otherwise. But that's where a lot of businesses stop. And that's why a lot of the projects fail, because they get those insights and they absolutely drown in them.
Yeah.
And then, so what?
There's a really good example in the telematics world. A great friend of mine runs a really super interesting telematics company, which throws off fascinating driver data that is just not being used. It's used more as a kind of try and keep the premiums down while you've got the device. But the device gives you all this data and information. And I know, this guy's frustration is, I can tell you so much about your customers, what they're doing. You never even asked me, but actually, you fitted this device in their car. They've openly given you access to this data. You're not using it. So you're right. It's great to have the wherewithal to find the data, but it's only as good as, what you're going to do with it and make use of it. Otherwise, you just got another database of stuff that you don't know what to do.
Exactly it. My background's in retail, specifically around kind of fraud prevention and internal theft and external theft and those sorts of things, and prevention of. And that is an industry that grew up from a physical security industry, right? So you originally had security guards in stores, and still do to an extent. Security guards in stores didn't rely on data; they were just looking for people who were stealing. And then data came along and flooded the market. And then you had a lot of leaders who were going, well, use the data, and the security guards who weren't trained on data were sort of scratching their heads going, no, I'm not a data person. And the industry kind of grew up a little bit. You got to the point where security guards would then start to understand, right, okay, I can check stock levels. I can see when this was last sold. I can, to a certain extent, they were starting to use some data to influence what they were doing. It could have an impact on it. Kind of became what I would call loss prevention at that point. Like, how do we spot patterns to an extent? But the next extension of that is profit protection, which is, how do we look at that from a wider business perspective and go, right, whilst we're doing this, how can we maximize sales and maximize our opportunities to serve our customers well through understanding all of the data that we're collecting from that? And there's very few companies doing that really well. And I think it's, I keep drawing these parallels between retail and contact centers, because they're all very similar. It doesn't really matter what the industry is. They're all suffering from
Yeah.
the same problems.
I think that's a really nice segue from that into absolutely into contact centers, because I think when I'm thinking about what are the great leaders of these businesses now doing versus the average or the poor, and the thing I think is they have this ability to blend empathy and compassion as a leader should be to the folks that they're leading, coupled with data and analytics. So great examples of that are things like, or bad examples, I guess, would be, the person was always held up as being employee of the month for sales, classic, and he or she every single month in, month out, was always considered to be absolutely fantastic because we measured one thing, volume, and, this person hit the volume. In insurance, that's an interesting thing, but volume is vanity in my book. So if you then look at the data properly and said, this person, A, knew how to game it, and B, none of their sales stuck. So actually they were doing a very, very unprofitable thing, but every month the business was holding them up as, the best salesperson. We ended up with, a lack of data. So in my experience, when I see, great contact center leaders, when you have a conversation with them, of course they'll have that, how do I engage my people and all those good things that they need to do? How do I be more inclusive, etc. But they'll also talk about, and I do this through data. I have oodles of analysis around what people are doing, how they're doing it, how successful they are, and don't take single data points and make that the reason for success. They blend things together smartly. And then you find out that actually Mandy, who's never had a reward for anything, but has plugged away for 20 years doing an absolutely brilliant job, best service, customer stay, keep coming back, all that sort of stuff. She's created more value than, the guy just plugging stuff.
I guess it's kind of sometimes leaving the short-term metrics to one side and looking at the customer lifetime value and how sticky you've made that customer through the rapport that you've built and the touch points that you've had along the journey. I mean, I kind of had an interesting experience last weekend where I got a confirmation of renewal from my car insurance provider without a renewal letter or an email, and which they claimed they'd sent me and I'd opened, which I could absolutely assure them I didn't. And spam filters being what they are, saying that somebody's read an email isn't really, it's not going to stick. But the interesting thing was kind of, I tried to contact them, couldn't contact them. Tried to ring through to a phone line, which asked for a policy number. Policy number wasn't recognised on the email that they'd sent me. Finally got through to somebody, ring through to a claims line who spent 5 minutes telling me that I shouldn't ring the claims line if I didn't have a claim. Spoke to the claims advisor who told me that that particular branch of the business doesn't even have telephone customer service, despite them having the phone number on the renewals form, which is very interesting. And they did outbound me and try and call me back, and eventually we cancelled the insurance. But the moment that had happened, a CSAT survey dropped through into my email to ask how I'd enjoyed the service over the last year. And my response to them was, luckily there was a box to add comments. I hope somebody reads that because I'm quite passionate, as you can imagine, doing what I do, about handing out feedback on those sorts of things. And I was like, well, one, if I've been talking about car insurance with my friends and recommending it to them, either I need new friends or they do. I could understand this conversation if I'd made a claim in the last year, but I haven't. So why would I recommend your service? So I think if you to combine what I've just kind of described and what you've said there is using your data points wisely, but not drowning your people in data. And that's kind of something that we value quite highly in the business, is helping people to make decisions on the data that they've got, not just providing them with like piles and piles of data that they end up procrastinating on, or looking at the wrong metrics, or using it to justify what they're doing rather than driving the business forward. It's about getting to those outcomes, right?
And I think you see that all the time. And obviously I'm looking at quite a lot of businesses at the moment. And some of them, just not making great use of data, or they're doing exactly what you just talked about. They're just taking huge database cuts out of policy platforms and sort of dumping them on people, saying, go figure which customers you need to sell to, which customers haven't bought things. not in any easy way. And to relatively junior people, you've then got a sort of mega spreadsheet of stuff. And you can't do anything with it and say, well, you should be selling more. Well, it's hopeless. And, I do see that an awful lot, that, you just don't have leaders who are experienced in data understanding and data management. You don't have BIMI people who can take this rich data and turn it into something useful in an easily readable format. And it creates chaos. Coupled with what you tend to find with that is that people then take that raw data and they interpret it in their way. So
Yes.
you then get this, and certainly in my last business, that we had 3 offices who all sort of had the same data, but actually each of them was then recutting it and reanalyzing it and coming up with different answers. So just kind of stopped all this and said, no, there's only one version of the truth. But it was a nightmare at the beginning trying to, so I go in with a set of numbers and say, I think it looks like this. The first argument would be, no, 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 no. You don't understand. It's really this. And here's my version of it. And then another office with a different one.
Then you spend years arguing over how you get to the right result, as opposed to discussing the outcomes and getting to a good result for the business.
Yeah. We had quite dirigiste about that, to be honest. I think, most businesses need to get to the point of saying, look, one version of the truth, you have to work with it. And if you could give us a good reason why everyone's data is wrong because we've got a mistake, then that's absolutely fine. If it is, then, we're all working on the same basis and we set our target on that basis, we review on that basis. And as you say, it then makes the conversation about what's happened and what we're going to do, as opposed to hours and hours of, I think it means this and that, and the other. And once you get there, it's a good place because you have much better conversations.
I think the best engagements that we have are with businesses who acknowledge that they don't have a single source of truth and need some sort of data transformation to get them where they need to be. And, we kind of, it's not our core business, but we'll kind of consult around that for them and help them get there initially. But far more concerning is the business that blindly believes that they're master of their own data and that everything's hunky dory, when in actual fact it's not. Some businesses are really good at it. They have the abilities internally to make that happen. But way more often than not, you've got different departments looking at reports and trying to compare apples and oranges together. And then wondering why their managers and the leaders aren't actually making the impacts that they should be making. It's because giving them the ability.
Well, insurance is full of that, as you know, because you've got an industry that is very poor at defining things. So if you ask the finance team what's a sale, they'll tell you X. If you ask the salespeople what's a sale, they'll tell you Y. And in every business I've worked in, the biggest tussle is usually between finance reporting and when a sale is made, because you then get questions like, well, when is the customer on cover? So the salesperson has done the deal with the customer, but they're not on cover. So revenue doesn't start flowing until later. So you then start to have that sort of debate. Well, I saw 10 sales today. Well, I saw 7. I'll ask 10 people insurance to describe persistency or retention, and then you'll get 10 different answers usually as to how that's measured. So it's an industry right with getting data to say what you want it to say, as opposed to having a common version of what it means.
And I think there's a nice segue here into something else that I kind of wanted to touch on, because I'm a big fan of, to your point there, asking myself the hard questions and not kind of, the answers might not be what I hope that a conversation would be, but ultimately it helps get the business where it needs to be. So like I try as much as I can in my role not to shy away from those hard questions. And where there's been a feeling, like that's something we deal with. It's not, it's a different perspective to what I've dealt with previously in previous careers. Whereas like if there's something's been done wrong or it's a failing, then we need to fix that by identifying it in the first place. If all you ever do is shy away from those hard conversations, you'll never fix the problems, which ultimately makes your life very hard further down the line. So kind of where I wanted to segue into that was, I guess, part of this conversation is about the talent pool. In the current day and age, like everybody's fighting over the same employees, over the same future talent, hybrid working, remote working. There's all sorts of stuff feeding into that. And whereas people previously would kind of circulate in their local area potentially for the more lower skilled employees, or in the middle ground area, mid travel area, you can get a train between two different cities. You kind of float between different organisations between them. Um, how are you seeing that talent acquisition pool play out now, Richard?
Yeah. That's a great question. And I think it's probably the topic most discussed in everywhere I am and every meeting I'm in is about the ability to source and keep and attract and keep talent across almost all disciplines. Um, and contact center turnover rates have literally gone through the roof. The great resignation is still going on. There is still relatively full employment. There's still an awful lot of industries looking to hire people. We've seen the disaster that is the airline industry, got rid of lots of talented people and now wants them all back. And guess what? They've gone and done something else because there were jobs out there. So I think, a huge number of conversations are around, how do I get good people? And it's very tough in IT. So if you want great data scientists, they're like hen's teeth. And I mean, great ones. I mean, there's lots and lots of very smart people that are good at maths. I mean, I'm not being, it's being rude here, but there are lots, but actually those who can turn that brilliant mathematical brain into understanding and sharing it with people who don't have that ability like me is a real skill at talent, hard to find. That's a particular area. So everybody on their sort of data journey and trying to do all this stuff, it's hard to do. So again, back to my earlier point, you probably just need to go and find a firm that can help you do it. Unlikely if you're small that you're just going to attract and be able to afford that talent. I think in the contact centers, it's particularly challenging. It does seem to me, in my usual way, that it is a lot of old blokes who are saying to working women, get back to the office. And, there's an awful lot of demand, you will, all this sort of thing from people who I think still think that the power's in their hands and haven't realized that this more flexible working and indeed working from home has put, the power back in the hands of the folks saying, you know what, if you want my skill, I don't want to be in your office 5 days a week. I don't want a 2-hour commute into central London. I actually want to balance my work and home life. My partner and I and the kids have spent, way more time together. It is a conversation I'm often hearing and we really enjoyed it. And we've been seeing more of the kids and doing the school runs and all those sorts of things. Why on earth do I want to go back and sit in central London, for example, in a relatively dull call center, with headphones to do exactly what I've been doing at home? So I think, those businesses that have gone down that route of, this is all fine, the holiday's over, come back to work, are finding it particularly difficult. And you can't justify doing that to people just because you've got an expensive office. Just write it off, put it below the line and say, that's not it. Get a better environment when people are in that they're going to more enjoy, because you don't need so much of it. You can make it better. And then concentrate hard on how do you give a great experience to people who are not in the office all the time, that are not party to that, some people, I don't know, that fun of the office day that some people would describe, particularly salespeople. How do you, what technology, for example, is out there to help create that engagement? And there are some really, really smart platforms out there now that, again, don't cost a fortune, that are based on gamification, which of course, everyone uses in their life. We all love it. I'm on Duolingo trying to learn Italian. It's all gamification. I'm desperately wanting to be at the top of the leaderboard for the new Italian words I've learned. And no, I won't speak Italian before you ask. And translating that into your business environment works. And I piloted that just before I left my last business. And it had a real uptick on engagement. People loved it. It wasn't, it was a bit of fun. We attached some prizes to it, not lots of money, but just a bit of prizes, and ran different competitions. Colleagues could see it on their phone where they were. We fed the data out of the business into it. So it was as accurate as we could get it. And people loved it. And of course they could sit at home and see their colleagues on the leaderboard, how are they doing? And then we had teams as well. So they were having conversations about how you're doing on the, on the challenge or whatever it may be. And you can then tweak the challenges to do whatever you want: more sales, better retention, better customer service, whatever it may be. And I love it. So I think, really this, we have to kind of rethink how we're going to attract and retain talent. And I think you look at a lot of attraction websites from people, they still show pictures of lots of people in call centers in relatively dull buildings as their outward view to the recruitment world. Well, who wants to go there? And they also forget that actually everyone goes to the Glassdoor site and say, well, that's what's really going on. If that's horrible and you're showing pictures of nasty big call centers that don't look like much fun, why would I go there? Because this other one over here is saying flexible working. I can do this, a bit of time at home. And then people saying this is a fun place to work, then they'll go. So I think it needs a lot of rethinking about how we hire and keep talent.
I guess it's kind of, I'm conscious we've just dropped over the 30-minute mark, so I'm going to kick it off short here. But I guess it's very similar to um, the shift that we've seen in consumer retail behavior. People no longer want to spend all their time out in shops shopping. What they want to do is go out, experience the products, look around the range and experience the building that they're in for a short amount of time, then go for a coffee, then go for dinner, then go to cinema and go home. What
Yeah.
they don't want to do is put loads and loads of bags about when they know they can get the same stuff in the shop that they can at home, order it online when they get home in the right size and try it on at their leisure, to send stuff back that doesn't fit, and ultimately get the same experience without any of the hassle of carrying bags around. And
Yeah.
effectively, it's the same thing. Like that same attitude that shifted that retail consumer behavior is impacting on the employee work pool now, no matter what business you're in. I think.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, and many of my connections are in retail. Apologies talking about all this hybrid and remote working for you guys. I feel the pain. It's unlikely that anything's going to change on that in the near future. But
I
thank you.
I do but I do think that this whole idea of more flexibility in employment patterns, we're already seeing people looking for 4 longer days as a consistent work pattern. That's
Yeah.
quite a big change because again, it didn't seem 5 minutes ago where people were saying, no, we must have, standard 35-hour weeks. You must be in sort of 5.5 days a week, or 6 in retail, whatever it may be. Very, very prescribed patterns of working. And actually, if you start to talk to your folks about what they really want, they're not asking for the moon. They're just asking for some more flexibility and are willing to give a lot for that flexibility. And I think, rather than seeing this head on as oh no, it's going to be really difficult, actually it can be a great opportunity. But what it does need is, back to what I said earlier, it needs a conversation. You actually need to ask people what they want, as opposed to assuming that, what they really want is, don't want to come in till 10 o'clock or to be out by 4. No one's saying that. They're saying flexibility, and you can have that conversation and find out what it is. And therefore you're automatically better engaged with your folks if you have that conversation, because they think you're listening to them at least.
Yeah. And there's a whole another conversation there around, our CEO kind of said something a while back around people don't always know what they want or what's best for them, which is another side of that conversation. And it's an absolutely valid conversation, but it's one that would be talking for the next 15 minutes on. So I'm going to leave it there. Food for thought for people. And I'll definitely pick up on that again at another time. Richard, it's been great to have you on the show. Thank you very much for your insights and conversation. Really enjoyed this episode.
Great to chat to you again.
Awesome. And if you're watching at home, we've got one more episode before I take 2 weeks off to get married. We'll be live next Thursday. And then we'll have a 2-week hiatus where I will be disconnected from the world almost entirely, or on pain of death. And then we'll return with a bang for a new series in early August, mid-August. Thanks very much for coming along, Richard. And thanks everybody at home for watching. If you've got any questions, please do feel free, drop them into the questions on the comments on the post, and we'll do our best to answer them as quick as we can. See you soon. Bye-bye.